Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and in this episode, we're going to talk about why positive leadership matters more than ever, even in the midst of riots all across the country. But before we dive into that very deep topic, I just want to take a moment to thank you for being here. If you enjoy this show and get value from it, please subscribe, rate, and review it. And remember, if you've got a question about positive leadership, just drop me a line at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com and I'll address it in a future episode. All right, well, what a time it is to be alive. I was going to focus this week's episode on lessons learned from the pandemic lockdown and what to keep in mind as we go back to work and things start to kind of open up and return to some level of normalcy again. But in the space of just a few days, it feels like the country has exploded on the heels of George Floyd's death caused by Minneapolis police officers. Now, this is a global podcast, so for my overseas listeners, just to bring you up to speed, what I am talking about is the tragic death of a black man who was pinned to the ground by police officers for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And despite pleading to be released and saying he couldn't breathe, he was kept in that unrelenting restraint for that length of time, which of course violated standard procedures and resulted in his death. So this abhorrent incident has triggered decades of simmering anger. And when cities are burning like they are right now, as these riots are happening, it kind of sometimes seems like the usual issues we talk about are not that important. I mean, you might think on face value, what does positive leadership have to offer us in the face of systemic racism, right? And maybe think, it's not really appropriate to talk about that right now. But actually, when you think about it for a little bit, positive leadership has a lot to offer us in terms of what is happening right now. And that's what we're going to dive in today. Now, I also, before we get into that, I do want to share a few thoughts before we get into that positive leadership conversation. I just want to share that I am, like so many people in this country, shaken to my core by the killing of George Floyd in broad daylight by people who are supposed to protect all of us, police officers. And I can understand and sympathize with the outrage it has caused. I absolutely do. However, I am also absolutely opposed to the violence that has ensued. Nothing justifies that behavior. Nothing. This is America, and the right to protest is a fundamental aspect of our democracy. Absolutely. If people want to protest, have at it, but do it peacefully. And I also want to add, while I fully condemn the actions of those police officers in Minneapolis, I also generally support the police and believe they do more good than harm. And so what I'm trying to communicate here is that this situation and how we address racism in this country is not an either-or proposition, which it's often portrayed as being, right? Like people want black and white, and I mean that in terms of clear-cut lines. They want to see things in kind of a very simple, clear way. But life is gray, okay? Especially big topics like this can get into gray areas, and it's not an either or proposition. So what I mean by that is, for example, it's possible to condemn the specific officers who killed George Floyd and still support the police. It is possible to do both those things, right? Like some people are sort of making it out that if you still support the police, then you must be okay with George Floyd being killed. No, that is not a choice, okay? Those are not mutually exclusive. It is possible to condemn those officers and still support the police. It is possible to condemn violent rioting and still condone peaceful protests, right? So what I'm really trying to say here is, instead of getting stuck in the deep ruts that have divided us for years, it is still possible, and it needs to be, to work across those ruts and to find a way forward. Okay, so with that in mind, let's look at what has happened and what is happening through the lens of positive leadership. Now, according to renowned positive organizational researcher Kim Cameron, there are 3 primary elements to positive leadership. Number 1, extraordinary performance, right? Engaging in deliberate behaviors that set individuals and organizations apart to become extraordinary in what they do. Number 2 is taking a strengths-based approach, and that means focusing on nurturing strengths in individuals and on what's going well. And number 3, doing what's right because it's the right thing to do. And that one we often talk about, especially in recent weeks when we've been dealing with the pandemic and how people are reacting to that. Now, so there's those 3 elements: extraordinary performance, a strengths-based approach, and doing what's right. Now, by any measure, I think it's safe to say that leadership at the Minneapolis Police Department, the MPD, doesn't really pass the sniff test on any of these, right? The officers who held down George Floyd and watched him die were certainly not exhibiting extraordinary performance in their duties. And they were definitely not doing what was right. In fact, their choices during that incident were the exact opposite of what positive leadership is all about. So imagine instead if the MPD leadership had chosen to lead with those 3 positive leadership elements out front. Now, to be clear, the MPD chief, the chief of the Minneapolis Police Department, he did immediately fire all the officers involved in the death of George Floyd, and he openly declared them to be at fault. He's also been a champion for fighting injustices. In fact, he and 4 other African-American officers sued the MPD for discrimination back in 2007. Still, we are left to wonder how things might have been different if he had chosen to be a positive leader in the department. For example, perhaps the MPD would have more police officers who do the right thing and perform at an extraordinary level, going above and beyond to live up to MPD's motto, which is to protect with courage, to serve with compassion. And if the leadership chose to develop individual strengths in their police force, perhaps the officers who killed George Floyd wouldn't even have been out on the streets. Because let's face it, clearly their strengths were not in community relations, and they definitely were not protecting with courage or serving with compassion, as their department motto suggests they should have been. Of course, and sadly so, the George Floyd situation is just one of numerous incidents of systemic racism over the years, none of which are acceptable. So certainly we need more diversity, we need more equity, and we need more inclusion. And positive leadership alone cannot solve this ingrained problem. I'm not trying to make that case, okay? Let me be really clear. However, I do believe it can help. And the way it can help is that it starts with leaders who are committed to cultivating those 3 elements, cultivating excellence, strengths, and doing what's right. And that commitment, it grows as more organizations, whether they're police departments, corporations, nonprofit, government and agencies, whatever, it grows as more organizations commit to cultivating a culture that eats, breathes, and sleeps positive and virtuous behavior. Undoubtedly, there are Minneapolis Police Department officers who do live up to their department motto and who do good. I have no doubt. And they can infuse positive behavior across the department, but they can't change the culture without clear and consistent support from leadership. I mean, if you are a regular listener on the show, we talk about this a lot, right? That is where it all starts, with the leader. Without positive leadership flowing from the top and throughout the whole organization, we'll never weed out the negativity, whatever that negativity might be manifesting as, right? And in this situation, what I'm talking about right now, it's racism, but it could be other types of negativity in your organization. So as you're thinking about how you lead this week, consider how your actions influence your teams and organizations. You know, what do you want your culture to be? And how are you going to make sure that the culture really does become a true way of life and not just a motto that some people honor while others just trample on it, right? What happened with George Floyd underscores more than ever why we need positive leadership in all aspects of our society. So I want to thank you for being a positive leader. I want to thank you for infusing positive and virtuous behavior into your organizations. And as you can tell, this week's podcast is really, asking all of us to think more deeply about how our actions impact others. And so in that vein, think about what else can you do to make sure that positive leadership becomes contagious and that it benefits those who need it the most. So if you want to share how you're using positive leadership to do good or how you're spreading it and making it contagious, a good type of contagion, not a coronavirus type of contagion, or if you have questions on this topic, write me a note at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I'll leave you with one final thought this week, and it's this. No matter who you are, where you are, the color of your skin, the problems you're dealing with, or how you're feeling, please know that you are a part of a very diverse and inclusive community, and that is the Positive Leadership Movement. We love having you be part of this family. Thank you for listening, and thank you for inspiring me to do what I do every single day, but more than that, for inspiring all the people around you and that you influence to do what they do to the very best they can every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.